we're going to have to make some really, really severe changes in how our food is raised and produced. For me, COVID was like, should have been the wake up call for everybody. You know, hey, you might not be able to go to the grocery store and get what you need tomorrow. You know, and if you do, there's a chance it's infected with something. Don't you think we ought to be concerned about where that food was raised, produced, and how it got on your table?
And we humans are literal specks of dust on that tiny dot that's tucked away in this one spiral arm on the outer edge of just one of 200 billion galaxies in the observable universe. And in that context, you know, I think the words of the psalmist take on new meaning, that what is man, that thou art mindful of him, and the son of man, that thou visitest him.
I'm a big fan in questioning these things and why we do the things that we do, why we use the chemicals that we do. And again, it's not just because the industry's evil. It's necessarily they're trying to meet a need, meet a demand. If there's a way to do it without as many chemicals, without as much processing, and it sounds like you're onto something, man, as far as this regenerative farming, and to kind of open people's eyes to just start questioning a little bit. Look at the ingredients and the stuff that's in your pantry. Can that be done? Can that be made healthier with fewer chemicals? Can farming be done with less machinery, in a way that's healthier for the soil and the whole food chain, basically from the ground to our mouths and everything in between? Good day, everybody. Welcome to Fire for Effect, episode 21. We've had 21 of these episodes. That's several months now, so we've enjoyed it. We got myself, James McBride, John Jones, Marcus Moyer, and today we're going to talk and dig into John Jones's life, which is pretty interesting and unique from most of the rest of the co-hosts of this podcast. So looking forward to just digging in and understanding what his life is like in very, very small town, North Carolina. Gentlemen, how are you guys doing?
Good.
Great.
Little drizzly and rainy here in nowhere, North Carolina, but very thankful for it.
Yeah, Marcus, so John's in North Carolina, I'm in South Carolina. We're both getting some rain here, consistent rain. And Marcus, you're getting snow.
In Virginia. Coming down
2-hour
steady.
delay for school.
Yeah, kids are excited about that.
Yeah, when I was stationed up at the Pentagon in D.C., it was whenever it was snow, you never knew, how many delays there would be to go to work, or if they cancel the day or whatever. It was just always very unpredictable.
As soon as that word hits the forecast, the kids become prayer warriors like you've never seen.
I bet. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
They start flushing ice down the toilet and putting spoons in the freezer and wearing their pajamas inside out, all the superstitions, and they pray fervently as well. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous child ensures snow and no school.
That's funny. Flushing ice down the toilet.
We got homeschoolers at my house, so they're like, what was I thinking?
That is funny. Ice down the toilet. So, I think it was John. I was back in episode 1, our very first episode. You and I were on it, and we learned a little bit about you, about your background and what you're doing there in North Carolina. So if anyone wants to watch episode 1 to learn some more, but we're going to dig in and pull some more threads on that. Because even though we've all been friends for 3 or so, I don't know, 2.5, 3 years or something like that, we've never been to where you live and don't really know the life that you live there in North Carolina. And we just get little snippets here and there as we talk to you. And So I'm just very curious. And in episode 1, you brought up that you do regenerative farming. I can't even say it. And of course, your dad, and your dad passed recently. But he has had a music business for a long time, and of course, you created your own music business. I think you were working with your dad, but also on your own as well. John Jones Music Maker.
Yep.
And as Marcus pointed out last week, and we try to point out occasionally, that all the music that's on these Fire for Effect episodes are from John Jones himself. So, and as Marcus said, it's become quite a trademark of the podcast.
Imagine, like Jim and so many others, I had never heard the term regenerative farming until I met John Jones. And it has since become a really fascinating subject for me, for many reasons. I know Martin Luther King Jr. Remarked about the progress of human intellect and ingenuity. He said, "The modern man, through his scientific genius, has been able to dwarf distance and place time in chains. He's been able to carve highways through the stratosphere and is now making preparations for a trip to the moon," which of course had not happened yet in 1959 when King was giving this speech at Morehouse College. He went on to say that these revolutionary changes have brought us to a space age. The world is now geographically one. Jet planes have compressed into minutes distances that a few years ago took weeks. And I've always been struck by that portion of his speech, because human beings, I think we've become pretty proud of ourselves and all that we've achieved. And I think that sometimes we actually get an inflated view of ourselves. I think we overestimate our importance. We overestimate our reach. We overestimate our level of control. And in relative terms, our planet, our solar system, is just this tiny dot in the midst of an almost incomprehensibly massive universe. Our solar system itself, our galaxy, Milky Way galaxy, is just one of at least 200 billion, with a B, 200 billion such galaxies in the observable universe. And we humans are literal specks of dust on that tiny dot that's tucked away in this one spiral arm on the outer edge of just one of 200 billion galaxies in the observable universe. And in that context, I think the words of the psalmist take on new meaning, that what is man, that thou art mindful of him, and the son of man, that thou visitest him. And so we're here in this remote corner of the universe, being told that we're responsible for the temperature and made to feel guilty about it. It's attributed to Paul Harvey. He said, "At the end of the day, despite all of our accomplishments, we owe our entire existence to a 6-inch layer of topsoil and the fact that it rains." And
so
those
true.
words are a reminder of how little we as humans ultimately control. Despite technological and cultural achievements, our survival hinges on this thin layer of topsoil and timely rain. These words serve as a humility-inspiring reminder of our dependence on soil health, the water cycle, the broader balance of nature. And with so much, literally everything riding on that, we would certainly be wise to pay closer attention to how we think about that layer of topsoil and how it's managed, understanding not only how it works, but how it works best, and then take great care to protect and use it to maximum effectiveness and advantage. That is what, my understanding as I've looked into this, that is what regenerative farming purports to do. And in the pre-Civil War era, monoculture of the South, where cotton was king, the southern land was nutrient poor, eroded, and not very productive toward the end. And I say this because John lives in North Carolina. This was the Civil War South, right? Cotton, as everybody I think knows, is a high demand crop. It extracts a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus and other nutrients out of the soil. And so repeated planting of that single crop year after year, decade after decade, without replenishing those nutrients in the soil, just completely exhausted it and turned it almost infertile. These cotton fields were left bare after the harvest, exposing the soil to wind and water erosion. No cover crops were planted. There was no vegetation. And so that topsoil was largely washed away, further reducing its productivity. It's evidence of God's sense of irony, I think, that the salvation of the South came at the hands of one of his former victims, a man by the name of George Washington Carver, who I believe, as I can discern from history, is maybe the father of regenerative farming. George Washington Carver was an African American scientist, an educator, an inventor. He was born a slave, and then rose to become one of the most influential agricultural pioneers in U.S. history. He spent a lot of his career at Tuskegee Institute, which was founded by another prominent African American of the time, Booker T. Washington. Developed innovative methods to improve farming practices for these poor Southern farmers. Carver was an early practitioner of regenerative farming. They didn't call it that back then. That wasn't a term that they used, but he promoted crop rotation. He used peanuts famously, came up with, I think, 300 different uses for peanuts. And by planting peanuts, put nutrients back into the soil that cotton had been draining for years and years, rotating out through sweet potatoes, etc., to restore soil fertility, encourage planting diverse crops, prevent pests, and get out of this monoculture that existed in the South. He advocated for organic matter to be introduced into the soil to enrich it, and by combining soil conservation with sustainable farm productivity, he improved the health of the land while increasing farm profitability, creating a lasting blueprint for what we now know as regenerative farming. Unfortunately, though, those lessons were not very well learned. Barely 50 years later, during the 1930s, the Dust Bowl struck the Great Plains, amidst the hardships and the backdrop of the Great Depression. And a large factor behind that Dust Bowl was poor farming practices, again, such as plowing up the native grasslands that had those deeper roots, planting, again, a monoculture, and failing to use soil conservation techniques, leaving the soil vulnerable and depleted. So when that drought hit in the 1930s, the winds started lifting that exposed topsoil, creating these massive dust storms that ruined crops and displaced thousands of families. Everybody's familiar with the Great Depression. And that crisis then prompted the federal intervention through the New Deal, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, focus on soil conservation, farm relief, and support to struggling communities. And I think it's probably the turning point of politics in America and the way and the American way of life, all brought about by farming, poor farming in this case. And so I think, in short, we've seen farming done well, we've seen it done poorly, and the nation has the scars to prove it. So this resurgence of regenerative agriculture, I think, is prudent and long overdue. And it's farmers like John that are learning the lessons of history and putting these practices back to good use. And I am excited to have this conversation with him this morning to learn more about it straight from the farmer's mouth.
So, first of all,
So, John, go for it.
okay, yeah, Marcus, your introduction there, you started with Martin Luther King, you went to the psalmist David, and then Paul Harvey. That's why we're friends. I don't know if you know that, or that's some really cool stuff, man. And yeah, that's super insightful there. I've so many times tried to have conversations, be it on a personal level or through social media, to try and create some awareness in more people about what an impact our agricultural farming community has had on our society, is supposed to have, and what danger, what threat there is to that whole community right now. And we're just so far removed from it in society anymore. And a lot for the reasons that you stated, from the Dust Bowl migration to the federal government's involvement. Um, we could get into, was it by design? In some, were there some conspiracies in mind there? And I don't know if we have time to get into all that or not. That we might have to put our tinfoil hats on for that conversation. But that is definitely something to consider. I guess for me, and Jim, you mentioned a few minutes ago how in contrast or comparison to everybody else in this group, that my lifestyle is very unique. But as soon as you said that, something kind of stuck out in my mind, that you guys, all being military career guys, you actually exhibited or demonstrated a trait in your lives that I definitely connect with, and that is the fact that you're willing to sacrifice and sometimes live through some hard circumstances so that other people could live a quality lifestyle, be it freedom or whatever you want to include in that. In my own life, there was a point where I definitely considered military life, but that didn't work out for various reasons. Won't get into that. But at some point, I saw the same trait in somebody who wants to get involved in farming. Um, that there's a whole lot of demand placed and burden placed on the shoulders of a farmer. And if you're a farmer, and I mean a real farmer, I heard a guy say one time, you're either a farmer or you're a bad actor at being a farmer. There is no such thing as a bad farmer, because like a farmer is legitimate. He's there for the right reasons. Um, and if you're a farmer, you're really in this to try and impact not just your own bank account, not just your own household, but you're really literally trying to help thousands and thousands of people just have food on their table every day. And this, I know that this is a huge overstatement, but or understatement. Sorry, understatement. But how much we take that for granted every day. How easy food is in our society to just reach out and grab at a moment's notice. I think about the food that's in my cabinets right now, and my own parents would talk about how when I was 5 years old, there was not food in the cabinets, and how quickly that's all changed. Um, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, there is, in a lot of us, there's that desire to make a contribution to mankind, to a good life for the people in your society. And I didn't go the military route like you guys did, but there was still something in me that just said, I need to figure out what it is I can do besides just looking at my own bank account, worrying about my own household. I mean, of course, that's our responsibility, but what about beyond that, right? Um, and as you mentioned, I was I was raised in a family. My dad was an entrepreneur and a musician, a music teacher. There was nothing that he wanted to do with about farming. Okay, he had to when he was a kid because his dad was trying to be a farmer, and my dad had a bad taste in his mouth from all that because it was during the really rough times for a farmer. So I did not come up in a farming household at all. I grew up in a community where pretty much all of our neighbors were involved in some sort of farming. So when I got old enough, I was looking for work, odd jobs here and there, and I would usually end up doing something farm related. So I got exposed to what a farmer goes through on a regular basis. Um, and I don't know, somewhere in my 20s, when I was really actually entering into the family business and getting into music, I was still just having this deep down need to do something about what I sensed was becoming an issue, and then that was the farmer around me. The farmers around me were all doom and gloom, like things are looking bad for the inputs, the overhead that's required to be a farmer, and things like fuel prices were getting ridiculous, and they still are. They're getting worse. And they were having to buy more chemicals, more manufactured fertilizer just to make the ground produce, which I'll talk more at length about that here in a few minutes. And there was nothing about it that sounded hopeful whenever I would listen to these guys talk. Trying to fast forward through, anything unnecessary here, but as it turned out, met and married the woman who became my wife, and her grandfather was a lifetime farmer, at least third generation, maybe more farmer. That's all he did his entire life. And while I was still full time in the music teaching business, when I wasn't down at the studio, I would just go up and check on Mr. JD. That was his name, JD, and just see if I could help him in any way. And I just more and more kept getting involved in what he was doing. And again, over and over again, I would hear conversations how there's no future in farming. And probably one of the main tipping points for all this where this was going was a friend of mine that I went to high school with. He got out of high school, and the first thing he did was go to the bank and borrow $250,000 just to become a farmer. And
Wow.
he's not. I mean, he's still farming, but if you think that $250,000 investment money made him, wildly successful or what, no, I mean, it just barely did make a dent in the farming expenses on that side of things. So it was just all these numbers, all these overwhelming factors that were coming my way. It's just one of those things where you sense it in your spirit. Something's not right here, and it was just bugging me so bad. And it was really weird for me, a guy with no farming background at all. Why was it bugging me? At some point along in my mid 20s, late 20s, I guess, the name Joel Salatin pops up on my radar. I'm not really paying a whole lot of attention at first, but I just hear quotes by him. And I understand that he's kind of a radical thinker, that he's doing some interesting farming techniques, and people are starting to look his way for solutions. And I don't know, somewhere along the lines, I decided to look up some stuff on him, and eventually went and visited his farm in Virginia. By the way, there, Marcus, if you ever want to go visit, he's in the Shenandoah Valley. I'd recommend anybody, whether you have the slightest interest in farming or not, go visit. It's called the Polyface farm, and you can go there and you can take a tour around his farm, and they'll show you what goes on day in, day out there. And it's just fascinating, really. One of the things that stands out when you're driving up there is you can look at all the farmland as you're driving toward Polyface, and it can look very barren a lot of times. And when you get to Polyface, you notice this luscious green pasture land. Everything suddenly takes on a whole new face, right? And we visited there and got a little familiar with some of the practices that Joel, I won't say he invented. He really he sort of looked back through history, saw what used to be done or even not done to let the ground produce in a fertile way and a more natural sense. And he just kind of, I think, put his mind to work. Okay, how can we sort of imitate or emulate that now without disturbing the soil so much? Because one of his peeves, and I think I'm inclined to agree with him, is that when mankind started inventing machinery and breaking the ground, that's when things really started taking a downward turn, slowly but surely, because it's not a natural thing, and it seems to deplete the soil more than it does contribute to it. So his work probably influenced my thinking more than anybody's. But it's really, I was jokingly saying before we started that this episode could be titled "Let's Find Out How Much John Doesn't Know About What He's Gotten Into." And that's really the case, though. I'm not just being funny about that. We've got a small 17-acre farm. I keep getting that number wrong for some reason. 17-acre farm, and it's enough to humble anybody. 17 acres is nothing whenever you're talking about farmland. It's a barely a drop in the bucket for most farmers, but it's enough to keep me humbled and always, I don't know, in wonder of how to make how to let the ground be fertile again after it's been impacted by man's influence for so many generations. So I don't know, maybe that was just kind of a summary of how I got to where I am now. And if anybody has questions about regenerative ag, what it is, what it isn't, what do you do on a daily basis, fire away, and I'll see if I can fill in any gaps there.
Quick question: did you have this farm before you made it regenerative farming, or the first time you had a farm, you started out it sounds like you started out with regenerative farming from the get-go, based on what you learned from Polyface Farm and all that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I could have made that more clear that, whenever I kept feeling sort of this gnawing in my spirit that I wanted to do something to help the farming situation and that part of our culture, I knew that the conventional way was not going to work for me. For one thing, unlike the buddy that I had, I wasn't going to go out and borrow $250,000 from the bank.
Right.
It requires a whole lot of machinery. And that's when I was introduced to Joel Salatin's methods. And so as soon as we acquired this piece of property, the regenerative ag direction was definitely for me, because it's very low. It's low machinery and low input focused, I guess you might say.
Yeah. So I guess you did say that. You're right. So and I just looked up I never heard of course, Polyface Farm or Joel Salatin, so I just looked it up, and you're right. I mean, it's one of the most, if not the most, famous regenerative farms in the world in Swoop, Virginia, as you said, in the Shenandoah Valley, about 10 miles west of Staunton, Virginia. Pasture-based livestock only. They raise beef, cattle, pigs, meat chickens. Meat chickens is what it's called, or broilers. Egg-laying hens, turkeys, rabbits, almost entirely on grass and in the open air. No feedlots, no confinement barns. Chickens follow the cows in mobile coops. Calls them eggmobiles. Pigs are used as piggerators. They root and till compost piles and forested areas in a controlled way to build soil. As you mentioned, no-till, no chemical fertilizers, herbicides or pesticides. Fertility comes entirely from animal impact, compost, and deep-bedded winter housing. And he does a direct marketing model. I'm gonna look this farm up to see if it's possible to buy some food from him and maybe use I don't know if you sell.
Yeah, you can absolutely order food from him. He's got a great network lined up. And I won't get into all the details of it, but he's also a capitalist and pretty shrewd businessman. I should mention that I've found that he's very controversial as well, as far as who's going to support him or reject his ideas. And some of his biggest detractors are farmers themselves. I found that out. He's somewhere in the middle. He's definitely a farmer, in a very true sense. But anybody who comes along and tells a whole group of farmers, "Hey, you're doing it wrong," he's not going to be popular at all. And I've definitely got some funny looks when the local farmers drive by my operation out here, and you know, eh, it's just what it is at this point, and we'll see where that goes after a period of time. I mean, I'm surrounded by your conventional, what some people call factory farming. That's what is around us. So there's a couple other regenerative ag minded folks around here. Some of the Mennonite community are really moving strongly towards that. So that it's not like we're totally out here flying solo, but it's still greatly disproportionate over here in Eastern North Carolina. I don't know what it's going to take for people to realize we're going to have to make some really severe changes in how our food is raised and produced. For me, it was COVID was like should have been the wake up call for everybody. Hey, you might not be able to go to the grocery store and get what you need tomorrow. And if you do, there's a chance it's infected with something. Don't you think we ought to be concerned about where that food was raised, produced, and how it got on your table? Maybe I'm just an overthinker in that, but
Yeah.
that's where I was going.
No, I think there's been a little bit of an awakening, with the MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again, with RFK Jr. and all that.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
he's been big on highlighting his concern with, a lot of evidence that a lot of these practices that we've been using for decades now, generations now, relying heavily on chemicals and processing,
Mm-hmm.
things like that, have made us more and more unhealthy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, organic farming, and we could talk about the difference, I guess, has been popular for quite a few years now. I mean, at least a couple decades. Organic foods, people buying organic foods because of the
Mm-hmm.
perception that it's healthier. I think regenerative farming is even. I mean, I guess you could have organic um, crops and things like that, and raise animals, beef, chickens organically on a regenerative farm. But it doesn't have to be a regenerative farm. You could just make it organic, or raise it organic. But I think it seems to me that a regenerative farm, pretty much everything is or more or less organic. If you're not using pesticides, if you're not using chemicals, or
Mm-hmm.
very little, um, it seems like that would be the healthiest source of food you could possibly imagine. Um, and you can kind of riff on that. But a question I had is, is this farm, you said it's 17 acres. Do you sell some of your products to the local stores and that kind of stuff? How much do you use it to feed your own family? And like, where does all this food go?
Yeah, so far, so when we first started getting into this, we knew because running the music business is my full-time thing, and we knew that this was going to be a slow, I guess, phase by phase type situation. And so right now, our goal is to put food on our table that we raise on our own land, and from there, we've done some barter and trade, which works really cool. I want to talk about that at some point in the future because barter trade, it gives you a whole different system of value than just paying somebody cold hard cash or even swiping a card or whatnot. You get a better sense of what somebody really invested of themselves to bring something, to a point of worth of value. But anyhow, yeah, we're really just trying to feed our family right now to start with, and and impact, our household, and then grow, from there. I will say this: if anybody has ever had the opportunity to raise and butcher their own hog, and the sausage you get from that homegrown pork, man, it's like nothing else. I would highly recommend anybody give that a try. It's the best. It's the best.
It's making me hungry just hearing about it. That's awesome.
Yeah, me too. And while we're paused here, we've brought up the term regenerative a couple times, and maybe just taking a moment to look at that term. That was one of the things that really attracted me to this type of farming as well, because it's less of a depleting type of farming. There's so much farming that's like you're having to fight the soil just to get it to grow something. And regenerative ag kind of doesn't look at it like that. We try to figure out, all right, what is the soil naturally designed by our creator to do, and what can we do to just kind of help that process? And most of the time, it's simple stuff like not trying to raise certain crops out of season on a piece of land. Go with the seasons. Sometimes something simple like burning off, letting a fire do the job, burn off a piece of grassland, which used to naturally happen all the time. But through a lot of government restrictions, now you're not allowed to burn certain places off or whatever. But letting that natural process, just looking for the most natural, least impact, lowest impact way that you can to just encourage the soil to do what it wants to do in the first place. And it's been a great process to try to rebuild the soil. The first time we came on this farm, we dug down into the field that we have cows on right now, and the soil was just like chalk. It was very tightly packed together. There was no airflow through it. There was no organism in there. There was no earthworms, bugs, nothing in there. And that's a weird thing to think about. That's not really what dirt soil is supposed to look like. I mean, you should overturn a piece of dirt and see all kinds of life forms there, but that's where we're trying to go, is because a lot of conventional farming is intentionally killing all of that. And I guess the regenerative ag movement is saying, wait a minute, I don't think we need to just kill and destroy everything that's in our way. Let's figure out a way to work with it.
It reminds me, do you ever see the movie Interstellar?
Yes.
With Matthew McConaughey? That reminds me of how you're describing. That's how the future could be if we keep relying on all this relatively destructive methods of farming. And again, as I say that, I'm sure a lot of traditional farmers out there are probably getting angry that we're using terms like that. I don't know. You kind of alluded to it, and I'm not a farmer, so I'm not trying to offend anybody at all. But just the point being that I do know that our farming techniques have gotten so I don't know, just or I don't know what the right word is.
Mechanized and
mechanized, storylines on chemicals and fertilizers and that kind of stuff. And I just growing up, and I'm from Montana, and I'm not a farmer myself, but again around farmers, and I know it's a super challenging lifestyle, regardless of what type of farming you do. So there's a lot of families just every year to year hoping they can keep the farm open and keep sell enough to keep it going, and the weather of course impacts that every year, and in some cases subsidies from the government to help keep them open, and now right now, like, there's all these trade wars with China, and they're trying to undermine a lot of farmers with certain products. I think soybeans is one of them. They're trying to hurt our farmers in America. So it's, I mean, I get it. It's a very challenging lifestyle. And I do really, really admire, anyone who chooses that lifestyle. Like you said, John, like just to choose to get into a lifestyle like that, that's so unpredictable and so dependent on, number one, dependent on God,
Yeah,
on
it
the
really is.
weather and the land and the earth and everything. But so again, I'm not trying to disrespect anybody who uses other methods. But Interstellar, fictional movie, of course, ironically a space movie, but such a good. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. And the
Yeah.
first hour or so is all about how the farms are drying up and the soil is getting lacking nutrients, and it's causing these dust storms in America. And Marcus and I have been to over in the Middle East, where we've both experienced real dust storms in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's a crazy sight to behold. And it was just interesting to imagine that happening someday in the future in America, if we don't just come up with a better way to grow our food and our crops, etc.
I certainly don't think farmers get the due and respect that they deserve. You remember back in 2016, that political candidate who really put his foot in his mouth talking about this? I think it was Michael Bloomberg who made that comment that anybody could be a farmer.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he said
I do.
anybody can be a
Yeah,
farmer.
now that
You
you
just
mention it.
put in seed, add dirt and water, and up comes the corn. What a ridiculous and
That's crazy.
moronic thing to say. Somebody who clearly has no concept or understanding of how the world works. Point you were making there, Jim, about actually both of you, how mechanized and chemically infused farming has become. And I suspect, at least from my reading of it, it goes back to the typical way that Americans do everything. We try to get the most bang for the buck we can as quick as possible. And so I imagine that the productivity per acre, is what's driving a lot of those decisions on why they do things the way they do. And so my question for you, John, was that as Jim was describing the Polyface farm and how that works, kind of a free roaming, almost a nomadic kind of farming, controlled in a way around a property. Does it take more acreage to farm, to do regenerative farming than it does, conventional farming as we understand it now?
Quite the opposite, actually. And I'm probably doing a poor job of describing Polyface because it's harmonious. Okay, there's a harmony and a synergy might be the right word. Um, they're on that property every day, basically moving uh, this set of animals off of this piece of grass and moving these animals onto it. And what it does is it just creates impact on the soil through, the cows are going to go through and they're going to disturb the soil. They're going to bring the chickens through and they're going to pick through the cow manure and they're going to help kind of distribute it through the soil. And then they let that piece of land rest for an appropriate period of time, and then they just start it all over again. And they'll do that similar process, say with hogs or whatever. Not exactly the same process, but there's the whole idea is take one small piece of land and just nourish it every way they can. And it actually Joel Salatin himself, if all his numbers are correct, you have in the cattle business, you have what you call cow days, and what that basically refers to is how many days in a row can you have a certain amount of cows on that piece of grass before you have to move them off. And the way he has operated with his has actually doubled his amount of cows he can have on his grass. versus the traditional, conventional, I'll say manufactured fertilizers and chemicals and stuff. So, long way around to answer that. But it actually takes a lot less land for the regenerative ag practices when they're fully instituted, and you're able to really stick to it. It does require a diligence that I don't know if many people have the staying power for anymore. It's a whole lifestyle.
Diligence in what way? I mean, I would think that any farming endeavor, whether it's regenerative or conventional, requires a lot of diligence. What's different about the diligence required in regenerative farming?
Yeah, that is a great question. So, um, you're a lot more hands-on with regenerative. You're going to be out with your animals day in and day out with the regenerative ag movement. It's there's a whole lot more sweat equity involved, and there's not nearly the mechanized aspect to it. And I've spent enough time around conventional farmers to see that a lot of times they're trying to because the farming community is shrinking. There are a whole lot less people who are wanting to farm anymore because they don't see a future in it. They're trying to counter that by adding more technology and equipment and machinery and stuff. And you're becoming less hands-on in that way. And so maybe the diligence that I refer to is that you're going to have to get out there and get yucky just about every single day. You have to be diligent and being honorable to the animals too, as far as in some farming right now, you can put all of your animals in one house and not look at them for a couple days. Um, Regenerative ag, you got to be out there every day. You got to look at them. You got to make sure that they are being nourished the best that they possibly can.
I lived in North Carolina for quite some time. I was stationed at the Marine Corps Air Station New River, and I spent time on Camp Lejeune as well. So I lived right. I was John Jones's neighbor in a lot of ways for a long time before we even knew each other.
Yeah.
And I noticed the same thing about farming in North Carolina and in other parts of the South. I'm originally from South Carolina, and I was always struck by the difference. My sister lives in Pennsylvania, and when we would travel up to Pennsylvania, specifically around the Amish country, around Lancaster, just a sharp difference in what I saw there versus what I would see in North Carolina and South Carolina. And the Amish, I don't know if they're strictly regenerative farmers because they do till, they till up the land. They do some other things that are not quite 100% aligned with regenerative farming. But I think in large part they do align in many of their practices. Their farms, as I understand it, I've heard this, and I somebody can fact check this. I have heard that even doing farming what we would consider the old-fashioned way, that the Amish produce more per acre than these modern mechanized farms, that have all of the new whiz-bang gadgets and use all of the pesticides and herbicides and all of the tricks of the trade that
Yeah.
modern farmers use. And so I definitely think there's an argument to be made there that going back to a more organic, regenerative way of farming is not only better for the planet, but it's better for the people as
It
well.
just is.
Did you guys ever, speaking of herbicides and pesticides, did you happen to see on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast the interview that he did with RFK Jr. back in, I believe it was June of 2024,
Possibly,
where
but
he interviewed? So RFK, he claimed that beginning around 2006, I think it was, farmers in the U.S. started spraying Roundup on their wheat. Kind of the background behind this was that back in the day when farmers would grow wheat, when they would grow corn, they would have to pay people to put tanks on their back, and they would walk through the fields and spray the weeds around the base of the crops that were competing for the soil nutrients and the sunlight. And of course, that's expensive to pay people to do that. And so somebody along the line figured out how to, I guess, genetically engineer wheat, and they called it Roundup Ready wheat, meaning you could spray Roundup directly on the wheat and it would not kill the wheat, but it would kill everything around it, all the weeds. And so now you're spraying this compound directly onto a food source. And farmers then found that not only did it destroy, competing weeds and that sort of thing, but it also acted as a desiccant. It would dry the wheat out, which of course for wheat farmers is important because if the wheat gets wet, it's ruined. And so in around 2006, according to RFK Jr., they started spraying Roundup directly onto the wheat just before harvest to make sure that it was dried out. And one of the key components of Roundup is glyphosate, which in its original usage, I believe, was a tank scalant. They would use it to clean the inside of tanks. And so according to RFK Jr., at least, now this product that's now sprayed directly onto a wheat product that is then used to make all kinds of different foods, bread and everything, that compound is now getting into people's system, and it's affecting what he calls their gut biome, I believe is what he calls it. Basically, that tank scalant is doing to your gut what it is supposed to do on the inside of a tank. And his contention, at least, is that is where we started seeing the huge spike in like gluten allergies, celiac disease, chronic diseases of other types. And so it's interesting to me that these things that we do as human beings, and in this case in the farming industry, that seem like a really smart thing to do, to improve production, has these second and third order effects, that we are now having to contend with. And I think it all goes back, if we roll these things back and get back to the right way of doing things, who knows how many downstream problems it would also solve. Sorry, that was a huge rant, but
no, it's all relevant too. And I gotta say, when you bring RFK into the conversation, this is not a conversation I can really have with folks around me in my locale. They feel like they are being targeted. The farmers locally here feel like they're being targeted. Like basically they're being told that they are the ones doing the wrong thing. And even talking about this stuff, I feel a little bit like I'm betraying the people that I love, that I've grown up around. That I wouldn't want for that to be suggested at all. That it's the farmers at fault here. This situation is a society problem that I can't unravel this knot. For some reason, it's just so hard to figure out where do you start helping people understand that this is an issue that's going to require just about everybody to live differently and to be more responsible for their own health. The farmers are really doing what basically their battle, their struggle with, as Jim said, with creation, requires them to do, because you're always battling the weather. Then you have, like environmental agencies that are saying you can only do this and only do that. You've got the bank saying, hey, you borrowed this amount of money for all of your equipment and we got to have that. And then they're trying to feed their family, so they are in a real crunch. And a little known statistic that I've tried to point out maybe a couple years ago and tried to help raise some awareness is that the suicide rate, not to put a dark spin on this conversation, but the suicide rate amongst farmers is actually higher than that of combat veterans, which is
Wow.
that should be something we know about, but
Wow.
we don't. But there's a sense of hopelessness, and I mean, just this conversation itself, you start thinking about, where do you try to even figure this problem out at, and it seems very hopeless. But there's that right there is where we usually just gotta say, all right, well, this is a God issue. Then we really need to consult the highest authority on this, because I doubt John Jones in Chinkapin, North Carolina, is going to be able to change everybody's view on the quality of their food and where it came from. But I'm going to try and do a part in that, and I've made that decision. Thank God my wife is supportive of it. But I think there's going to have to be a whole lot more than just us involved here. So it's growing. It's growing. There's a couple of great names to look up out there. One organization is called the Carbon Cowboys. They're kind of a quirky couple of guys, and they're going around everywhere and testing soil, trying different methods, and just showing that this can be done. And they work a lot with combat veterans, because a lot of times I think guys come back from combat and they're looking for a way to grow something and do something nourishing with their lives, and so they're getting involved in the regenerative ag stuff, which I think is so great. I mean, that stirs my heart like nothing else. But as I mentioned before, Joel Salatin's a great one to look up. Greg Judy, another great name to look up as far as how to just work with whatever you have. And now that I think of it, I'm pretty sure it was Joel Salatin that was talking about how you do not have to have acreage in order to accomplish this. You can use what you got in your backyard. You can use garden boxes. You're just going to have to commit to this as a lifestyle, and you're going to have to get out of the habit of going to the grocery store and getting what you need all the time. I tell you this, you guys, you may or may not believe this. Anybody listening may or may not believe it, but it's absolute truth. I've grown up pretty much average like everybody else. Just get your stuff from the grocery store, eating those things my whole life. That's what I was used to. Whenever I started looking into the regenerative ag movement, I started thinking about the way I ate, and I got rid of certain things from my diet, like sugar and processed foods, especially dressings. What do you call that? Well, is it condiments you put on food? Things like that. I got rid of all of that, and I started tasting food differently after a period of time. It took a little while because you go, I guess, through withdrawals or whatever, but you start tasting the food differently, and you can actually enjoy the flavor of say a salad, a spinach, or the meat, or an egg or something. You enjoy it more deeply because it's not masked or camouflaged by putting something extra on top of it. And I guess I say that to just point out how we're really just used to and we're spoiled to food being done a certain way. And we put ketchup on everything, put ranch dressing on everything. Everything's got to have sugar. Everything's got to have preservatives. It would be just awesome to see what our society's health would look like if we got out of that habit, and we got away from putting so much sugar and preservatives in our systems, and we ate more natural foods. I would just love to see what would happen to our, the kids that we say have to have medication just to sit still in class every day, or the obesity, the diabetes, things like that. I would love to see and what that would do. And the thing of it is, it doesn't cost us anything extra. In fact, it would cost you less from your pocketbook, to eat that way, to eat more naturally. It can be done. It just requires some diligence and a new lifestyle that most of us are not going to readily accept, because we're just I think we're a little too spoiled to the way things have always been for what, 2 or 3 generations now.
I want to tie in a couple comments that Marcus said and you said, John. So, you know, I think one of the big reasons that the MAHA movement, RFK Jr., like you said, you bring up his name around traditional farmers, and they can get pretty upset. They feel like that they're the target. In in everything RFK does and says about health, and especially related to a chemical or a process leading to some kind of health, chronic health problem in America, it's so controversial because it's, he's looking mostly at correlation versus causation. It's very difficult to point to a chemical and say this chemical caused this disease in this population. Very difficult, if almost impossible, to do that. But you can look at correlations. But of course, as Marcus pointed out a couple episodes ago, that statistics can be used and abused however you want. You can take statistics and look at correlations, and you can use them in a lot of different ways. And I think that's why he's so controversial, because he's mostly looking at what he sees as correlations to certain processes, certain chemicals, certain, things, even in vaccines, things like that, and saying that he sees through his rigorous analysis that when a certain chemical or certain vaccine with a certain process is used, it correlates to a certain health outcome in a certain part of the population. But it's hard to prove that, and again, if not almost impossible. So I definitely see why there's very strong emotions on both sides of this topic. Now, tied to that, and tied to Marx's comment about the Roundup story. So farmers that do that, or use chemicals, use pesticides, use fertilizers, things like that, they're doing it for rational reasons. Like they're
That's right.
trying to help their crops grow. They're trying to prevent weeds from killing their crops, or trying to, et cetera, et cetera. So back to Marx's specific point, because this is a good, I think, way to help us understand the difference. So Marcus was talking about, they were using Roundup and going through the lines of crops and spraying the weeds, because the weeds were crowding out or, impacting the growth of the actual crop they're trying to grow. So how do you look at that? Like, if I don't know what kind of crop we're talking about in that case, Marcus, I don't know if you know, but, you obviously deal with weeds as well. You obviously don't want weeds impacting your crops either, but you don't use the same methods to combat that, I'm presuming, than a traditional farmer. So how do you approach that problem?
I think it's important to note, first of all, that they were talking about, well, they were talking about wheat in that situation, right? Is that what we were talking about, the wheat? Okay. So
Yep.
yeah, I want to make sure I was on the right track about that. I don't grow wheat on my farm, just to be clear about that, in case anybody's watching and knows the intricacies of what goes into raising wheat. What I'm focused on is trying to raise good grass or I should say forage for livestock more than anything else. So the advantage that I have is, and a lot of regenerative ag is focused on, we're not necessarily trying to single out one particular weed or grass and get rid of it. We actually welcome a diverse palette for our livestock to eat, because it's very much more natural that way. Your wild hogs are out there eating a little bit of everything, depending on the season that they're in. So, I guess for this particular question, how I deal with anything that's undesirable in my pasture is through the application of different livestock. Different livestock will graze and basically target different grasses or weeds just because of what they like, and they'll also do it. They'll eat different things at different times of the day, and that might seem like a minor point, but it's actually there's a lot of implications there because a lot of times in your conventional farming, you put livestock out on one big piece of grass and you just basically say, go out there and help yourselves. When you apply regenerative ag, you concentrate them on a smaller piece of grass all at once, and they're less picky, I think, and they'll eat a little bit of everything. And so it helps get rid of those undesirable weeds that you or may or may not want in there, and it encourages the growth of the healthy, nourishing stuff in there. So I don't think I can speak to the weed problem for everything and all things in farming. And that's something that needs to be understood too. Is that it man is such a never ending subject as far as what do you do about this and that in farming. Be it weeds or weather or what have you. So I don't know if that's really any help for that question or not, but that's been my experience so far.
So you don't grow wheat. Got it. So, and maybe if you did, or maybe wheat is not conducive to regenerative farming. I don't know. And maybe if you did grow wheat, you might have to use some kind of pesticide or chemical,
Mm-hmm.
is kind of your point. So that's just, again, just to be fair to farmers that do that. So that makes sense. So that helps me understand that regenerative farming it limits us in a sense, I guess, for certain types of crops, and that's helpful for me to understand too. That you're mostly talking regenerative farming sounds mostly about growing food for animals that are food themselves, like livestock,
I think it's pretty
pigs, that
fair to
kind of
say.
stuff.
I think it too. Okay, so regenerative ag too also it refocuses why you're raising whatever crop or livestock you are and who you're trying to serve in that. So, um, a conventional farmer around here with say 1,000 acres, he's trying to raise enough wheat for people all. There's no telling how many states he's trying to supply food for. So he's got a huge, we'll say, customer base, but I don't know if that's the right term. But the regenerative ag movement is trying to pull farming back to raising food for your immediate family, for your immediate neighbors and your community. So I think one of the issues in farming is that when you're trying to raise enough food to feed billions, literally billions of people stretched out across an entire nation, your quality goes down. The quality of your product has to go down. It's just that's how consumerism drives us, right? And so I think the regenerative ag movement is kind of blowing the whistle and saying, hey, the more we do this, the less quality of food we're putting on people's table. And I again, this is a social problem that I don't know how we're ever really going to convince people that we need to take another look at how farming is done and do it on a smaller scale and serve a smaller customer base, but with a better quality. And
Yeah,
hopefully somehow
makes
that will
sense.
balance out for all parties.
Hmm.
Jim made a really good point that these farmers they're just doing their best to make sure
That's
that
right.
their crops survive and that they can support the people who depend on the food that they produce. So I didn't want to in any way insinuate that that farmers are somehow greedy and are like doing these things for, bad motives. We do hear a lot about, if you turn on the news, oh, they're poisoning our food source, and maybe that's true. You do have to like question some of the ingredients that make it into some of these processed foods. But to the extent that that might be true, I don't think it's the farmers that are responsible for that. They're like Jim said, they're trying to ensure their crops survive. It reminded me of a quote by Mary Wollstonecraft. She said that nobody chooses evil for evil's sake. They only mistake it for the good that they seek. And I think that's a true statement where our farmers are concerned. They're not intentionally trying to do anything bad. They're not trying to hurt anybody. They're trying to do the best they can.
That's right.
And in any vocation, anytime, as you were saying, somebody approaches it with, maybe we're doing this wrong, maybe we could do this better, defenses automatically come up. That's human nature. People fear sudden change. Nothing is so painful to the human mind as great and sudden change.
Mm-hmm.
Even when we know it's necessary, it's hard to get people to change. But in that same vein of thought, as you've described, regenerative farming requires less acreage. It's more profitable in terms of yield per acre. So with those two things in mind, with farmers struggling, drowning in debt, struggling to make their properties productive, why do you think they're so wedded to the conventional way that's not really working well for them? Clearly, as highlighted by the suicide rate that you just said. So why are they so resistant to something that seems clearly to work better?
Other than what you pointed out about the resistance to change, I mean that's really what I think it's mainly rooted in. We have the mindset. Well, this is what my daddy did, and this is what his granddaddy did, and don't come on my farm telling me what I should be doing. This is my lifestyle. I know what I should be doing. And in a lot of ways, they're absolutely right about that. I think a lot of times the wrong people are put in the position to go and talk to these farmers. If you send somebody from the federal government onto a farmer's property and tell him what he can and can't do or should and shouldn't do, I mean you're starting that whole thing off wrongly anyways, right? And I agree with the farmer in that regard. That it shouldn't be the federal government say so as to what I can and can't do on my farm. Um, I think it's just hard. It's really hard to accept that we got to take a different direction in something that's been done the same way for so many generations. And I've seen enough. I worked for a chemical and seed company for a little while when I was 20 years old, I think, and I saw where the herbicide companies would send out sales reps, and they'd meet with a group of farmers and smile and give them all hats to, shiny new hats to wear, and they'll even throw a fish fry and have them all over and treat them, just give them the old schmooze and make them feel like, they're part of a club, and so there's a sense of I guess maybe it's a good old boy mentality that goes on there, and it's hard to tell, if this individual farmer is, friends with this circle, and you try to talk to him and say, hey, I really think you need to change what you're doing. He's going to look at his circle of trusted friends and say, no, we can't all be wrong. I mean, we're the good guys, right? But there's just a whole lot of politics that goes on, within that conventional farming circle, and I only saw just a hint of it, but I kind of knew what I was seeing. I don't know why, maybe because I was an outsider looking in. and that always maybe gives a little hint of troubles are coming when you send out your smooth talking sales guy to make everybody feel like they're one of the club. There's probably going to be something to be dealt with there in the future.
How long do you think it would take to turn a piece of property around through regenerative agriculture to restore it?
I'll tell you in a few years. We're working on that ourselves. I'll tell you this: we are 5 years in. We're 5 years in, and granted, without getting into a whole lot of personal details, we've had a lot of what I'll call interruptions, but that's probably not fair. I mean, it's just life. Life has taken some interesting turns where I couldn't commit and devote the time that I wanted um, to this farm. Um, I definitely have seen how things have started to look differently, feel differently as far as the wildlife we have around here and whatnot. But I think that maybe if we zoom out on that question and you talk about how long does it take, I get that same question from my musical students all the time. How long does it take to get good at an instrument? And a friend of mine, he builds boats for a living, and he says people ask him, how long does it take to build a boat? And he always says exactly the same amount of time as it takes not to build a boat. And his point is, are you just not going to do something because of the time it takes, And I kind of like that mentality, I don't know how long it's going to take, but, the sooner we get started, the sooner we're going to get there, I guess, is the only thing I can figure out. Sometimes I'm an overthinker, and then sometimes that's all I got is the simplest logic to go with.
Love that. I love that answer. I'm going to start stealing it for other things.
Yeah.
Do you have any neighbors that do farming in a conventional way, just as a comparison, like along the fence line, like your property compared to theirs? Is there any noticeable difference?
Yeah. Yep. Both sides, all sides, everybody around us, it's a whole different thing. I mean, ours, if you look across, well, I'm looking at it right now. In fact, out my window, the neighbors' fields are going to be very, what is the word I'm looking for? Everything's very even and consistent and neat, and it looks like man-made because it's kind of what it is, right? And you look over at my stuff, and it's definitely got a more wild look to it because I've got when you do regenerative ag, you've got your pastures are at different growth levels at different times because you're moving your cows around and whatnot, and um, your typical beef cattle raiser is just going to turn their cows out on one piece of grass, and all the grass stays the same level all the time. And that's not how regenerative ag works. We got it at different levels throughout our operations. So it's not as neat and orderly looking. Regenerative ag is not, and that might be one thing that scares people about it.
It's
And
messy and unorganized.
yep. And for some of us, that might be what draws us to it. I don't know. But it's kind of scary to me to think that we're trying to so um, control livestock and animals and plants to make them look like they come from a factory. That's just, I don't know, something about that gives me the heebie-jeebies.
So can regenerative agriculture be done at scale? Like, is that
Absolutely.
something? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. I may have said this. I'm not sure. Joel Salatin says, start with what you've got. Look in your backyard. If you have, just a backyard that's fenced in, you can start right there. I mean, there's, if you look on YouTube, there's no end to videos you can find on how to start raising chickens in your backyard, start a garden in your backyard, a garden box in your backyard. And there's also testimonies from people who talk about how that's changed their health and their nourishment, their nutrition from doing just small practices like that.
So that's on the small end, but on the big end, is there an upward limit to what can be sustained through regenerative agriculture, like
I see what
on
you're
a
saying.
nationwide level? Yeah.
So I might not be the best one to ask about that, but I know for a fact that I hate to keep harping on his name, but Joel Salatin again, he has he's built a network of farms that adopted his practices throughout. I know that the eastern seaboard, there's a lot of people who basically uh, he goes in and he helps them build the infrastructure, teaches them the practices. And, I guess there's probably a percentage that goes to Polyface. I don't know exactly how that all works. But so yes, absolutely can grow, but not in a way that, defeats the purpose, I guess, because you're still growing a quality product for a smaller consumer base.
Jim, I stepped on you. I'm sorry, man. Go. You had a question or a comment?
That's all right. This discussion about just, growing things in a healthier way. It reminds me of an episode on Joe Rogan. It had to be about 6 months ago. And I'll try to find it and put a link in the description later on. But it was like this lady from Stanford or something, and she was going to medical school, and she's number one in her class. And her brother was with her, and she basically dropped out of medical school because what they were teaching them about the human body and about health and things like that was just not common sense. And she was questioning it. When her and her brother got into this big, health thing, and Joe Rogan, made her famous for a while, and she'd been in several podcasts since then. But the one thing that just made it, I always look for something that tries to explain a complex topic in the most simple way that's easy to digest. And the one thing she said, she was talking to Joe, and she's talking about all these chemicals that are in all our foods. And, Joe's asking her questions, and she's like, tell you what, for anyone listening, go to your refrigerator right now, pull out your loaf of bread, and look at the chemicals in the loaf of bread.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. I got up and I went to the fridge and I pulled it out, and I was stunned. And I don't remember what brand we had. It might have been Nature's Own. I just looked it up. I asked what the most popular brand of bread in America is today, and it's Nature's Own. The name implies health, and it is. And again, I'm going to be careful here. This is how they make things and how they produce things, and I will say that a lot of the chemicals in our foods, and I'm going to give some examples here in a second. A lot of these chemicals and things are have to do with processing, but also has to do with preservatives for longer shelf life, and also for coloring, and also for texture, things like that, which is a response to a demand signal. They're trying to be competitive. They're trying to sell their products more than other people. They want, unlike in a lot of third world countries, we want our products to have a really long shelf life, so we don't have to go, it doesn't go bad so quickly, it doesn't mold so fast or whatever.
Yep.
So, but at the same time, to defend the average American consumer, we don't know that therefore to prevent that kind of stuff requires all these chemicals. And of course, the FDA will approve the chemicals, and it's all legal on the up and up. But back to the MAHA mindset is, you may not be able to prove with causation that a certain chemical or a combination of chemicals causes something, but you can find correlations, and even that's difficult because there's so many inputs into our what we're eating and breathing and living in on a daily basis, and it changes from region to region. So it's a very complex topic. I get it, but back to the loaf of bread. So I just pulled up and asked what are the ingredients in 100% whole wheat nature's own loaf of bread. And here you go. Whole wheat flour makes sense. That's good. Water, yeast, brown sugar. So there's the sugar right off the bat. Fourth ingredient. Wheat gluten, soybean oil, vinegar, distilled monoglycerides. That doesn't sound good. Enzymes, monocalcium phosphate, ascorbic acid, soy lectin, and then their multigrain variant has even more things. But the one thing that jumped out was monocalcium phosphate. So I asked, okay, what are these ingredients for? What are they supposed to do? And I'm using AI to answer these questions. So distilled monoglycerides is a dough strengthener and powerful anti-stalling agent. Monocalcium phosphate, fast-acting acid that works with baking soda or as part of a leavening system. Ascorbic acid, which is actually vitamin C. It's a natural dough strengthener and oxidizer, so that's not a bad thing. Soy lectin emulsifier. And again, this is separate from regenerative farming. Obviously, just to the larger topic of, if you just look at the chemical, the little microscopic words of the ingredients in our foods. Just go to your fridge right now, go to your pantry right now, and look. And so many of them have these things in there that help preserve it, help give it texture, help give it color, that we don't know what it's doing to our bodies, especially in the long term. So again, I just really like the whole idea of, and another thing too, you know, what it all ultimately comes down to also is cost. So these things, these preservatives, they make food ultimately less expensive, which helps feed more people. So that's the other side of this coin, that a lot of these things do help end up feeding more people. And if you look at the population, the world population of hunger, it's gone down substantially over the last several decades due to free market economies, increase technology, in farming, that kind of thing, but also these chemicals that do help preserve food and make it last longer and make it less expensive. So there's again, back to the kind of the logical reason behind these things. There's logical reasons behind how we got to this point, but we haven't questioned until recently what the methods that we are using, the chemicals we are using, the methods of growing crops and agriculture and farm animals that we have gotten accustomed to using. And to your point earlier, John, and for all three of us were saying, the farmers that are out there that are using traditional techniques, modern traditional techniques, you made the point that your friend, invested $250,000. Like, they've invested millions and millions and millions of dollars in a lot of cases into the techniques and methods that they're using now. So that's another barrier. It's a barrier to not only a change in mindset, but also just the money invested into the way that the traditional farmers are doing things now. So I'm a big fan in questioning these things and why we do the things that we do, why we use the chemicals that we do. And again, it's not just because the industry is evil. It's necessarily, they're trying to meet a need, meet a demand, a growing demand. Our population's growing around the world. Actually, now it's going to start decreasing with our birth rates decreasing in all of the modern countries. I think the only region that's growing now is Africa, if I'm not mistaken. as far as population birth rate replacement. So that's a whole other topic. But anyway, if there's a way to do it without as many chemicals, without as much processing, and it sounds like you're onto something, man, as far as this regenerative farming, and to kind of open people's eyes to just start questioning a little bit. Look at the ingredients and the stuff that's in your pantry. Can that be done? Can that be made healthier with fewer chemicals? Can farming be done with less machinery, in a way that's healthier for the soil and the whole food chain, basically from the ground to our mouths, and everything in between. So that was a rant, sorry, but I just wanted to ultimately point out, that how simple it was to understand a loaf of bread has all these chemicals that we just don't even think about. And why does it have to be that way? And does it have to be that way? So that's all I wanted to say about that.
I think you make a really good point there, Jim. And John as well. We were talking about how, in the past, in America's history, everybody was a lot closer to their food sources. Farming was more prevalent, and where you got your food from was a lot closer to home. With the industrial, the boom of the industrial age, the shift from an agricultural society to a more industrial one, migration to the cities, now people are a lot further away from their food sources, and so a lot of the preservatives that Jim was mentioning go into those foods for the longer shelf life, and part of that shelf life is consumed by getting it from the place where it was grown and raised and processed into the grocery store where the consumer can then go get it. Jim, you made the point that world hunger has gone down. I don't remember where I read this or heard it, but within the last few years, less than 10 years, world hunger has been reduced by 50%, is what I heard, what I read. I'm not really sure how they measure that, what those metrics are, but that is a statistic that I heard recently. And so it's not that, as Jim was saying, that everything's all bad in terms of how things are done, but is there a better way?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's made America unique and great, is that we've always been willing to ask that question. And I agree with Jim. I think you're onto something, you and others like you. And I hope it gains more and more traction.
Well, I certainly appreciate the supportive comments. There's, being honest, there's been several times where I just have to stop and wonder, is this going to go anywhere? Is my little 17-acre piece in Eastern North Carolina really going to make a difference? But, again, I got that friend with the boat building analogy in my mind. And, there is maybe just a part of me that's really just curious too. Is it possible to go back to a more self-sustaining way of life for a lot of people in America? And your point about us being far removed from how our food is grown, that's so on point. And maybe just kind of a little side note, a little bit of a plot twist. I read one time a guy was talking about being a rancher in the 40s, and World War II came along, and everybody, all the hams went and joined the military. And after the war was over, they did not come back. They didn't come back to work in these rural jobs, these hard life jobs, because they found that they could get jobs in factories or jobs working for the government instead of going back to the hard life of farming and ranching. And that seems to be something that was a very pivotal point in our society, that a lot of people got away from the family farms and the family ranches, and they did not go back because they found that they didn't have to live that hard lifestyle. I hope I'm not painting modern day regenerative ag as that kind of lifestyle. It's really not. I mean, as I said before, you do have to get out on a daily basis, be very hands-on with the animals, but it's nothing like what you're going to read in history books about, your great grandma having to get up at 3 a.m. and chop firewood and churn butter and all that. So it's nothing near that drastic anymore. But I would say it is something that it just gives us all a different perspective on what what are we used to settling for as our food sources, where we get them, what they're made of, how they're produced, and are we willing to take the chance and assume that all of that is done for our best interest? And a lot of it probably is. Then again, there's a lot of it that may not be, and at any rate, we have the responsibility. It's nobody else's fault. We have the responsibility for knowing what our nourishment is on a day-to-day basis, and especially when you become a parent, you're responsible for your children's nourishment. I think that needs to be a very real conversation you have, and some ask some hard questions there. Been good talking about this though, guys.
Hey, quick question. So on average, how many hours a day do you think you dedicate to your farm? And we haven't really got into it, but your music profession, how many hours a day do you give to that?
No 2 days are alike for me, so that's a hard one. That's a hard one to answer, to be honest with you. I'll say if a day goes kind of as I want it to, I generally get up pretty early and take care of some farm stuff for probably I can put 3 or 4 hours in before I'll head to the studio, and that's usually when we teach music, we put in about an 8 hour day, something like that. So this is pretty reasonable amount of time, but that's an ideal day. It just depends on whatever else is going on in life.
So just about 2 or 3 hours a day on the farm, basically, on average.
Yeah, yeah,
It's not
and
too bad.
I'm using that as a very loose, very loose answer because, as I
Yeah.
said, no 2 days are alike. It's just, and maybe that's kind of something else that appeals to me about it because you never really know what you're going to get day in and day out with this lifestyle.
So speaking of the music part of it, I thought we might go in that direction in this episode, but we got in the weeds and the farming, which is awesome. I would love to have a future episode since you two in particular are very music oriented. I would love for you two to just go on a tangent about different aspects of both your music niches, I guess you could say. I remember one of the episodes, John, you were sitting in a room, and you had, I think it was a banjo behind you or a guitar or something on the wall or something like that. That was pretty awesome. And I know Marcus, he performs for his church and other venues and singing and stuff. So I have almost the only relation to music I have is listening to it on the radio. That's it. But I would love for you guys for a future episode to kind of craft an agenda for that one and go down that rabbit trail.
Hey, we actually can kind of tie that in real quick, Marcus. You mentioned the Dust Bowl, uh, migration that happened. Wow, that's almost been 100 years ago, I guess. But anyhow, um, maybe the one good thing that came from that was a lot of the people who had to head out towards California ended up being people like the families of Buck Owens and Merle Haggard, and they all ended up in California together all at the same time and kind of spawned a whole movement of country music that we may not have had. And it was all influenced by um, all of the orchard workers, farm workers, and everything from different nationalities that would come together and work together. And then in the evenings, they all play music together. So you might have like Mexican immigrants, German immigrants, or whatever, and they're all bringing their music, Appalachian music, all of it, all mixed in together. And then when it made it out to Bakersfield, California, it all blended into, and I'm leaving out the blues. I shouldn't do that, but it all blended into a lot of what we call country music now. So, there's a tie-in
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah, that is fascinating. There's a whole subculture and genre of music and the performing arts that were born out of this diaspora of displaced farmers in the Midwest and on the
Yeah.
plains. So,
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. Fascinating.
And we can also do, I think, a subtopic on when we do that episode is, do you feel that AI is going to threaten the music industry? Because I'm sure you guys have heard.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I'm already poking the bear there. So we the three of us already follow. I think it's Holy Groove. It's called. There's AI. I think I'm pretty sure it's AI produced blues that sings, puts music and work, to the gospel and to biblical books, and it sounds amazing. And then I've heard some other ones that are just mind boggling. There's another version I think I shared with you guys that's it reads or it sings books of the Bible in folk music style, and that's scary stuff.
It's incredible. It's
cool,
incredibly
but
good.
it's scary.
Joe Rogan did another interview with I think it was Brett Weinstein, where they talked about this as well with AI and music, and that's fascinating podcast if you want to go listen to it. But my father-in-law has written music in the past. He's written several songs, and he still dabbles with it. But now he's into this AI and the AI assistants. So he'll write the words, and then AI put it to music, and and you can. It sounds like a human being singing this, So I joke with him all the time when he'll write me and say, "Hey, I wrote a new song," and I say, "No, you didn't. You wrote a poem. AI wrote a song." Yeah, that'd be a fun
that's
topic.
Crazy.
Yep.
Here's a maybe an interesting tie-in. I'm already hearing people talking about how, because of all this AI stuff, and it's all it's AI videos and AI everything out there now, that it might lead to a kind of a backlash for a hunger for authentic people and authentic human voices and human videos. Kind of a tie in there to the farming aspect too. The no chemicals version of music, so to speak.
Regenerative country music.
That's right.
There's the whole genre of music that was born out of the Civil War as well. The African American slave culture, what they used to call Negro spirituals. And I've heard AI do a lot of things, but I have never yet heard AI attempt to recreate that, because there is a soulfulness in that music. There is a pain that comes through that I don't think a computer can reproduce. And so there is a very human element to music that I don't think AI will ever be able to replicate.
Unless we are a people so far removed from that soul that we don't recognize it, which is, I think, a very real danger. So many people are willing to accept what has no soul to it. It's just junk food, and they're okay with that. Yeah. And okay, yeah, that's definitely a whole nother conversation worth having.
For sure.
And that's basically kind of the theme of Huxley's book. What's the book?
Aldous Huxley, A Brave New World.
Brave New World, yeah.
Brave New World, yeah. Basically, that's basically that theme right there. John, you were talking before we came online or went live. You're talking about, and we were talking about potentially the next episode 22, being something you and Rich were talking about. Can you remember? I forget what it was exactly. Something to do with Christmas or.
Yeah, I can easily remember that one. Really stood out for me. And Marcus had a great contribution there, talking about, we need to have respect for our parents, because let me see if I can get this back in context now. But what I was telling Richard was how significant and what a deep impact it's having on me this year to be the ones responsible for passing on this message that God has been giving mankind since the beginning of time to the next generation. So, family tradition, like reading a passage from Luke about the Christmas story, is taking on a whole new importance and significance. It's now not just a tradition. it's what my parents did for me, what their parents did for them. Which again, that's why we have to respect what our parents, according to the laws of God, punishable by death if we don't. And I think that was for the purpose of protecting the messengers, so that we deliver the message to the next generation. And it's not just a tradition that our parents did. It's literally being the ones who bear the message and pass it on to the next generation.
Yeah, that sounds like a really rich discussion. Looking forward to that. And I think that's what we'll try to do for next week for episode 22. And then episode 23, I think, is going to be, hopefully, Taylor George leading us through a discussion on Joseph, the husband of Mary, the mother of Jesus. He was sharing with us a year or so ago, a whole I don't know, discussion or whole education on the aspects of Joseph that I knew nothing about, and it kind of elevated him to a really strong you know uh stepfather figure and husband and just male role model, and he's often forgotten about in the Christmas story. So we're looking forward to that as well.
Very good, very good. Well, gentlemen, I think I'm going to have to sign off for today, but this has definitely been good for the soul today. And I know I kind of wandered a bit on answering some of the questions, but maybe some future discussion will help clarify.
No, I thought it was a good
Excellent.
discussion. And I think if you've got a couple minutes, John, farmers, as I said before, are special people. Guys like you and so many others that are involved in these regenerative agricultural efforts, I think really brings to life and takes to heart the scripture that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And I think regenerative farmers in general, but especially the regenerative farmers, I think take those words and that responsibility seriously to be good stewards of what belongs to God. And farmers, I think, have a special connection to God, I think, and probably because literally every year they get to be an active partner with God in creating new life. And every one of us depends on both the farmer and God, whether we realize or admit it or not. And I think that's probably circling all the way back to the beginning, Paul Harvey. I think that's what he was describing in what is now a famous address that he gave at the 51st Future Farmers of America National Convention in Kansas City, Missouri. This was in 1978. Have you guys heard this, called So God Made a Farmer? Have you ever heard this?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And on the 8th day, God looked down on his planned paradise and said, I need a caretaker. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody willing to get up before dawn, milk cows, work all day in the fields, milk cows again, eat supper, then go to town and stay past midnight at a meeting of the school board. So God made a farmer. I need somebody with arms strong enough to wrestle a calf and yet gentle enough to deliver his own grandchild. Somebody to call hogs, tame cantankerous machinery, come home hungry, have to wait lunch until his wife's done feeding visiting ladies, then tell the ladies to be sure and come back real soon and mean it. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody willing to sit up all night with a newborn colt and watch it die, then dry his eyes and say, maybe next year. I need somebody who can shape an axe handle from a persimmon sprout, shoe a horse with a hunk of car tire, who can make harness out of hay wire, feed sacks, and shoe scraps, who planting time and harvest season will finish his 40-hour week by Tuesday noon, and then painin' from tractor back put in another 72 hours. So God made a farmer. God had to have somebody willing to ride the ruts at double speed to get the hay in ahead of the rain clouds and yet stop in midfield and race to help when he sees the first smoke from a neighbor's place. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody strong enough to clear trees and heave bales, yet gentle enough to yean lambs and wean pigs and tend the pink-combed pullets, who will stop his mower for an hour to splint the broken leg of a meadowlark It had to be somebody who'd plow deep and straight and not cut corners. Somebody to seed, weed, feed, breed, and rake and disc and plow and plant and tie the fleece and strain the milk and replenish the self-feeder and finish a hard week's work with a 5-mile drive to church. Somebody who'd bail a family together with the soft, strong bonds of sharing, who would laugh and then sigh and then reply with smiling eyes when his son says that he wants to spend his life doing what Dad does. So God made a farmer.
God calls us all to be faithful stewards of the land that he has entrusted to us. From the Garden of Eden, where Adam was placed in it to work and to take care of it, as we read in Genesis chapter 2, to the instructions in Leviticus, where they were told to let the land rest periodically. Scripture emphasizes both cultivation and care of the land. The earth belongs to the Lord, as I just said. The earth and the fullness thereof are the Lord's, and it's our responsibility to use it wisely, protecting its resources and its creatures that depend on it. And when people neglect or exploit the land, the consequences follow, as we rehearsed in our own history here in America. And we can read about that as well in Scripture, in Isaiah chapter 24. But this thoughtful stewardship brings blessings and sustains life and honors God. And by honoring God through caring for the soil, the water, the plants, the animals, I think we participate in his creation and ensure that it thrives, not just for our benefit, but for generations to come. And Scripture teaches that stewardship is not exploitation. The earth belongs to the Lord, and when we protect it, we honor him and we sustain his creation for future generations. So thank you for what you're doing, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate the words. It's just, sometimes it's, I don't know, it's hard to hear that. And, I don't know, like I said, it's hard to think you're making any kind of real difference, for a long time, but, I appreciate the thoughts anyways. I hope there's something that will just raise questions in people's minds, you know.
Thanks, gentlemen. It was a great discussion. Learned a lot, and hope we all make it through our rainy and snowy day. Everyone stay
Perfect.
safe.
Thank you all.
Take care,
Thank you
God bless
so
you
much.
guys.
Good chatting with you this morning.
Yeah,
God
man.
bless.
Good to see you guys. God bless.